Hi guys, so Mhairi Black from the SNP asked a question about the job retention scheme, but she added on the topic of a second referendum for Scottish independence. Now, I'm going to explain in a moment why she did that, and I'm going to explain why the minister responded the way he did. So let's hear what they had to say.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister has recently said that the job retention scheme will last into next year, but he's also said that there will be no referendums on Scotland's future for a generation. Now, of course, the Edinburgh Agreement signed by a Tory Prime Minister provided the legal framework for the 2014 referendum. So I'm wondering, can the Minister quote me where it says in that agreement that there cannot be another referendum?
Well, I commend the Honourable Lady for trying to get a referendum into questions about the job retention scheme.
Okay, so why did she do that? Well, I think there are two reasons. First of all is you cannot ask ministers a question because they will not respond. I think at this stage, the SNP have realised that if you ask a question to Boris Johnson, to Michael Gove, to any of the ministers, anyone on the front bench, they will not actually answer the question. They will use it as an opportunity to grandstand. And I uploaded a video about this recently with Michael Gove. Michael Gove was actually chastised by the Speaker of the House for doing this. Now, she's also doing this because at this stage, you may as well do some grandstanding of your own, because it's pointless. Boris Johnson and the ministers don't respond to questions. They don't respond to questions. They respond, but they don't answer questions. From the Labour Party, from the SNP, from particularly the SNP, they have something they really don't like the SNP too much. And if you're asking questions and you're not receiving answers, then it makes sense to just pass the time in this way. Unfortunately, this is what Parliament has become. You ask Boris Johnson, for example, questions. He doesn't answer the questions. He uses it as an opportunity to grandstand, to pontificate, to say, look, the other day I shared a video where Ian Blackford asked a question and Boris Johnson replied by saying, I want to congratulate him for supporting universal credit, which is not the case. But he was able to do that because Ian Blackford had already asked his questions. In the same way, this is what they're doing. Now, let's hear some more of the response.
I mean, and actually, while we're all fighting this pandemic and trying to secure and support people's jobs, it beggars belief that the SNP carry on talking about independence referendums and about...
So you're criticising the SNP for talking about independence referendums during the pandemic. So I assume, Alister, you have a similar problem with people talking about, for example, Churchill's legacy during the pandemic or Brexit during the pandemic. Remember, I had actually asked for Boris Johnson. I suggested Boris Johnson park Brexit until the pandemic had been dealt with. Maybe he didn't listen to you, Alister. Maybe he should have listened to you. Let's park Brexit until we get this pandemic dealt with, and then we can get back to it. In the same way you're suggesting that, the Scots should park independence until the pandemic is over.
Separation, I find it really quite disappointing. But the answer to her question is that it was mentioned many times in the white paper that the SNP government produced in advance of that referendum. Once in a generation was mentioned on a number of pages. So
let's actually look at the evidence. So Alister has said that it's been mentioned on many pages, number of occasions. Here is the document. I'll leave a link in the description. You can have a look at it yourself. This is the white paper that was published in 2013 about the Scottish referendum on the 18th of September 2014, a choice between two futures. Okay. It says here, and I did a search for once in a generation. Okay. And you're free to do it yourself. It says here, two results. So on the first page, on page 3, it says, if we vote no, Scotland stands still. a once-in-a-generation opportunity to follow a different path and choose a new and better future, a better direction for our nation is lost. Okay. The second one is on page 10. It says, it's a rare and precious moment in the history of Scotland, a once-in-a-generation opportunity to chart a better way. Okay, so you're saying, haha, checkmate, he has them. But there is a little problem. And he gave away the game, unfortunately, because I'm not an expert on these things, but he gave away the game. Alister gave, he shouldn't have actually showed his cards. He described it as a white paper, and he was correct. It is a white paper. But there's a problem with white papers. It says here, and this is Wikipedia, okay, I know Wikipedia is condemned by many people, but this is, you can look at the evidence yourself. According to the British government, white papers are a tool of participatory democracy, not an unalterable policy commitment. White papers have tried to perform the dual role of pressing firm government policies while at the same time inviting opinions upon them. Now, I just want to highlight once again this part here, which I think is important. Not an unalterable policy commitment. You understand what that means? It means that the white paper can be altered, or the policy can be altered later on. So it's not set in stone. So if the Scottish government said back in 2014 or 2013 actually that this was once in a generation, but that's alterable. It's not something set in stone. Now, I think it's also very important to remember that there was a Brexit referendum that came shortly after the Scottish result, and the Tories at the time said you must, and the Labour Party as well, they tried to convince, and they successfully convinced, I think, the Scottish people, because of the European Union, because the UK was a member of the European Union at the time, that if Scotland voted to leave, they would lose the benefits of being a member of the European Union. Now think about the irony of that. Now, of course, there are a number of other things to think about as well. For example, Alex Salmond was the leader at the time. He's no longer the leader. Nicola Sturgeon now is the leader of the SNP. And parties change. So once again, if the SNP provided this as a white paper, a white paper is alterable. A policy is not something set in stone, as I said. Also, parties change. The SNP has a new leader. Many MPs, I think, have changed. Some have entered Parliament, some have left Parliament. So that has changed. But also the Conservative Party has changed. The Conservative Party used to be pro-European. Now they're anti-European. Surely, if they can change, I imagine it's also possible for the SNP to change. So this idea that it's something that the first referendum, where the people of Scotland voted no, they wanted to remain part of the UK, is somehow set in stone, doesn't make any sense. But I think the SNP will continue to push this. And one other thing that I think is very important to remember is that the SNP are not the only independent, pro-independence movement in Scotland. So if another group, for example, the Green Party, if they support independence, or another small party that is the pro-independence party, if they were to ask Alister Jack the same question, well, I assume he can't respond by saying, well, the SNP said it was once in a generation. They're saying, yeah, but we're not the SNP. So this response, if it's valid, which I don't think it's valid, but if it were actually to be valid, it would be valid for the SNP, not for other movements that are pro-independence. But let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think about all of this. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.